Hello again. My name is Sam Robinson, and this is the Gnostic Syncretist channel and podcast. Thank you for joining me tonight. Welcome. Everyone is welcome here, no matter what their background, no matter what their system of belief. For I'm here to try to unite the various traditions through the esoteric tradition, which is the sum of them all. And so tonight's video is going to be about the esoteric tradition, the origins of the mysteries and the mystery schools, where they come from, how far back did they go, um, who were the first initiates, who were the first founders of the mysteries, and we'll go through their history in a brief, rough outline. This will be to a degree introductory, but at the same time, it will provide a nice foundational snapshot of what is meant by the sacred mystery school traditions. What are the esoteric mystery schools? Where did they come from? Who were the first? And, who taught them this information? Was it aliens? Was it gods? Was it people from underneath the earth? Was it people from another star system? All this will be answered as much as I'm capable of answering these questions. And I will give you what is given out in the mystery teachings that we have access to in this world. And a lot of the books that I've spent years gathering together all these books back here behind me. And they tell a wonderful story. Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine is back there, Max Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, Rudolf Steiner's Cosmo Memory, Dion Fortune's Mystical Kabbalah, The Kabbalion, and many other books, such as Anacalypsis, On the Origin of Mankind and Its Destiny. There's many, many, and those are just only from the last couple hundred years. So, but let's dive right in. Those are just some of the sources that people use to try to figure out where the mystery schools came from. And it goes back really, really far. So in the mystery schools, they taught that this information stretches back to the beginning of our physicality. And our physicality, according to the Eastern chronology that's provided in the Secret Doctrine, is 15 million years ago, when man reached peak materiality. We were finally cast out into matter and fully materialized as a physical being. Now, granted, our being is not really the body. That is the containment field for the body. That is the vessel, the vehicle of experience. The physical body is simply that. That is all that it is, really. It's not who you are. It is matter, a physical form of matter ensouled with 6 other principles that are driving the body. The body by itself would be nothing. Just flesh and bone and made of your basic earthly material substances. So let's go back in time. You have, obviously in one of the other videos I've done, I talk about the absolute and the unconditioned root principle of the universe, which is not even God. It's pre-God. It's pre-cosmic. It's pre-manifestation. They just call it the absolute. They call it that, or Sat. And that awakens a new activity, and it produces the logos, the one, which becomes the all. And the best way they describe this and to think of it is that God, if you want to think of God is a circle whose center is everywhere, but whose circumference is nowhere. It's a boundless circle whose center is everywhere, meaning everywhere in the universe is a center of the divine. We're all reflections of it. There's no part of the universe that's without the divine. Every 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 single shred of particle and atom and molecule and dust is all has consciousness and divinity. And that's what they explain, that there's nothing dead in the universe. There's nothing that is without divinity. There's nothing without at least a small portion of divine consciousness. And then that after the universe differentiates, which begins with the one, which splits into two more, becomes a trinity. It's like cosmic mind and cosmic matter. It makes its way on down the chain of manifestation and differentiation, getting more and more complex, more and more um, dense and material, but not really material yet. It's just the matter is going further from spirit, becoming less pure spirit and more mixed up with matter. And this is the process on a macrocosmic scale. Now, on the microcosmic scale, we are monads. We are a divine reflection of the one spirit, the all. We are a reflected essence, like a ray of light of that great cosmic fire, that great light. And we go through various degrees of differentiation ourselves, meaning the monad gets a vehicle, is ensouled into that vehicle, and that vehicle carries it through what's called the spiritual chain of evolution. And eventually you reach a certain point where we've gone through enough experiences and we've attained all we can without becoming material, fully materialized like we think today. And we eventually manifest completely. Now, this is also in conjunction with the earth manifestation. The earth and us as beings on this planet, our environment, we manifest together. We densify together, as far as I can tell from reading all this stuff. So when the earth became fully materialized, we became fully materialized along with it. And this was what's called during the third root race epoch. It's called the Lemurian Epoch in the mystery schools. And that was halfway through this third root race. There are sub races of the root race. So you have 7 root races. You have the Polarian root race, you have the Hyperborean, then you have the Lemurian, then you have the Atlantean, then you have the Aryan, which is the one we're in now, and then you'll have whatever the next two are. We don't even know what they'll be called, but there's 2 future races. And they're not races like you would normally think of. They're more like evolutionary steps of consciousness. And they really define this as varying degrees of consciousness and varying stages of a form with different principles in a higher or lower degree. So the very first root race did not have a mind, it did not have an astral body. It had simply pure spirit in a form that wasn't even physical, and it was senseless and mindless. The second race, the Hyperborean race, gained an ether body and a few other things, like a life principle. And they were a little bit more physical. They were still mindless. But then to get back to the mystery schools, it's real complex. But once you get down to the Lemurian period, the Lemurian period is on a continent called Lemuria, which was a term used by Ernst Haeckel, who was an 19th century scientist in the field of evolution and anthropology and I guess, you know, evolutionary biology. And he coined this term for this lost continent that stretched from Australia to Madagascar and all the way across, including Easter Island and all these various islands in between. And Lemuria was a massive continent. So that's where Lemuria and the Lemurian Epoch took place. It was on Lemuria, this massive continent that is gone and is a lost continent. And the Lemurian Epoch is when the mystery schools were founded. And it was after the halfway point when the Lemurians, as an androgynous, semi physical, astral, etheric being fully materialized 15 million years ago and then split into the two sexes. The androgynous split into the two sexes. And there was a reason for this, but I won't go into it today. The point being, they were still very, very close to the spiritual side of things. And so they created cultures, and then these beings, higher beings than us, who had once been in our stage of the evolutionary chain, they trained and taught and instructed the first initiates of the Lemurians in the mysteries of the cosmos, in the mysteries of their own being, in the mysteries of the laws of nature, the natural law, the mysteries of the Godhead, the mysteries of the earth, of magnetism and astral phenomenon and all sorts of things. But they didn't have a mind. It was more intuitive. They could still see with the spiritual eye, the eye of Siva, the Dhamma eye. They could still see and interact with these spiritual beings. Now, it reaches a point where that's no longer possible, but during the Lemurian Epoch, it was possible. And these beings instructed mankind 15 million years ago in the first of the mysteries, when they were still able to really interact with the spirit world in a way that we cannot even really fathom today, because we'd have to go into an altered state of consciousness to try to do that. That was their natural state of consciousness. Now, bear in mind, they didn't have logic, reasoning, or conceptualization. They didn't have mind, but they had spirit and power over the life force, which is how they did a lot of the amazing feats that they did. There was a group of them that was part of this initiatory class that were called the Sons of Will and Yoga, and they were amazing. They were giants of great power and benevolence and magnanimity, and they were some of the highest initiates of the Lemurian Epoch. And Blavatsky talks about them in her Secret Doctrine. And so the initial initiates, the first class, you could say, like X-Men first class, no, like Sacred Mysteries, Secret Mystery School first class is Lemurian Epoch, and Lemurians themselves, these beings that were more in tune with the spiritual world and very much able to interact with those instructors from the higher planes. Now, they weren't gods, but they were more advanced than we are. They were simply beings further along in spiritual evolution, should ever be considered gods. They weren't aliens. They weren't from another planet. They were us in the future, so to speak, if we make it as far as they do. Spiritual evolution is a great chain of being, and everything goes through the same processes or the same stages. Maybe not processes. They go through the same stages, and we are a stage. The human form and period is a stage. It is the human epoch, and we evolve out of it. Well, these beings had already done that, and they were more advanced. They had already moved beyond ever needing to be truly physical, and they interacted with us, instructed us on the universe, and instructed us on all that secret mystery knowledge that they had acquired throughout their eons of existence. And so the Lemurians found the mystery schools. They train their own initiates once they have been trained by these higher beings, these more advanced types, and they found the ancient mystery school traditions 15 million years ago, and it passes on down. And as they lose more and more of their ability of natural psychism and natural spiritual sight, they are unable to interact with these beings the same way they did before. This takes a long time. By the time you reach the Atlanteans, they were in a middling state. For a while, some of them were still very naturally psychic. They were giants of men. They were huge. They're 15 feet tall, giants. And this is who built the pyramids eventually. It's a race like that. It's still us. This is another human type. The Lemurians and then the Atlanteans. The fourth root race is the Atlanteans. And the Atlanteans had some of their mind developed at this point, and they had some of the original psychic abilities and abilities to manipulate um, kind of nature powers and natural energy at will, at least some of the most powerful ones. And, eventually, of course, what occurs is on down the line, the Atlanteans become arrogant and they start abusing this knowledge. And there's a split in the esoteric order. You got to bear in mind, this was a universal religion, not even a universal tradition of secret initiatory knowledge and sacred initiation into the nature of the cosmos that was everywhere across the world during this Atlantean period. It was everywhere. It was universal. It was a singular whole and holistic tradition that eventually had a split. It had a schism. There was a schism in the mystery schools. And this schism in the mystery schools, according to another source, Edgar Casey, could be the split between what they call the Belial group and the Emilius group. And it had to do with a certain artifact of great power called the Two Eye Stone. And it could be used to tap in and engage with the spiritual entities. This is the higher spiritual entities like Emilius himself, who was supposedly some great, very spiritual being that they interacted with and were able to use this stone to contact. Because, like I was saying before, they lose the natural capacity to easily interact with it by the middle of the Lemurian Atlantean period. The Lemurians were able to do this very easily. It was natural for them. It was intuitive. It was instinctive. By the time you reach the Atlantean period, they have to engage in ritual magic. They had powers, much more natural psychism than any of us do. We don't really have any. And they had a little bit of mind. They had some thought. They had the mental body had started to germinate and seed itself in the middle of the Atlantean period. This was the golden age. I mean, this was the time of the heroes and the gods, and they had great power and they had great responsibility, and they abused it and eventually destroyed themselves. Now the Lemurians were destroyed, and their continent was destroyed supposedly by volcanism, and the Atlanteans are destroyed by water, and to a degree, I guess, volcanism though. But in the Edgar Casey version of this story, they destroyed themselves to a degree with this weapon. Well, it was really a crystal called the Two Eye Stone that could be used for many things. It was powering their civilization. It was a great stone, the crystal, but it was also able to interact with higher beings. But it was also able to interact with lower beings and be used as a weapon. And the Belial group won out, and they used it and abused it. And um, this is what part of the schism of the mystery schools in Atlantis was about, was that there were two sides. There was an original mission to help evolve humanity along its chain and path of spiritual evolution altruistically, and not to actually take an active role in the political sphere. Or you cannot, can only affect the humanity by teaching, by instruction, by guidance. You can't set yourself in positions of power and forcibly alter things. That's black magic. And what occurs is there's this schism where some of these adepts and initiates decide they don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to have this high charge, this mission anymore. And they decide that they are going to go for temporal power and use their abilities to gain it. And they become like Jafar, the great vizier, who had abilities, who had the ability to control the sultan. They set themselves up as magi for hire, and they become dark occultists, dark magicians, and invert everything. And you have the white side. And so there's this break. The Magian order breaks in half, and eventually, they're warring it out. And some people say this is what the War of the Mahabharata is about in some other texts, but they end up destroying themselves and their continent sinks. Atlantis sinks. Now, according to the mystery school tradition by Blavatsky, this is the main continent of Atlantis, and the height of Atlantean power was a little over 1,000,000 years ago. And I know that's an astonishing number. 850,000 years ago, the continent itself broke up and parts of it sank. Now, that's not the end, obviously. It's clearly not the end. Because we have all the way down to Plato and the descriptions of the Timaeus, you have stuff about Atlantis 10,500 years ago. Well, that's the last remnants of Atlantis and the final destruction where that island sinks into the middle of the ocean in the Atlantic. And that was called Poseidus. And he has wonderful descriptions that I would like to go over someday in this channel, but not today, that are about what Atlantis was like at that time, as how they saw it, and how this was passed down from Solon, who had learned it from the priests in Egypt, and then it was taught to Plato. So, what happens when you think? What do you think would happen when the continent sinks? What's going to happen? Well, you have this one. You have this universal tradition. You have a whole mystery school, a holistic, completely intact mystery school system of teaching, instruction, and knowledge about all sorts of things. Well, they're going to sink. They know that's coming. They know they're going to be destroyed. And so, what do you think would happen? Well, the priests scatter. The initiates and the hierophants and the adepts, they decide that they're going to go in all different directions and try to refound civilization after their destruction. Well, so that's what we see to a degree. Maybe not right after 10,500 BC, but this is where all the different religious traditions, the mainstream religious traditions, and a lot of the ancient ones, this is where they come from. They scattered in Atlantis sinks, and they scattered all directions, and they go and they've found new civilizations. This is why there's always these stories everywhere, from the Mayans to the Egyptians to the Sumerians to the Chinese to the Indians. They all have these great stories about these beings coming to, well, I shouldn't say beings, these humans, more advanced humans that are much bigger than they are, that are basically giants, which is what the Atlanteans, they were considered to be giants. They were like 10 to 12 feet tall, and they had great knowledge and great power, and they instructed the earliest mankind in all the different myths and all the different places that we find civilization restarting, in agriculture, in science, in wisdom, in astrology, in astronomy, in mathematics, in everything, in husbandry. And so you find this tradition everywhere. You find it in the stories of the Anunnaki, you find it in the stories of the Mayans, you find it in the stories of the Chinese with the Yellow Emperor, you find that the stories of Manu and the far east in India, you find them in Quetzalcoatl and the Aztecs, you find it in, you know, Horus or Thoth in Egypt. You find the same version of the same story everywhere. And this is the rebirth of the fragments of the mystery schools. The fragments were scattered with the destruction of Atlantis. And what occurs is these fragments of the truth were brought to the four corners of the world. And each one is now found in all the sacred texts. There's fragments. So each religion, each mainstream religion, except for maybe Islam because it's too young, every one of them has fragments of the original tradition. The Jewish, the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Brahmin, the Taoist, all these things, and the Bhagavad Gita and the Puranas and the Upanishads, in the Tales of Enki and Enlil, all these things, every one of them has fragments of the original Atlantean mystery school teachings in them. And this is what Blavatsky shows in The Secret Doctrine is by going through every one of these, she shows that these are the fragments. She first presents the tradition that has been kept alive in the far, far east in India by a certain secret group of occultists and adepts who have our best interest at heart and have kept it alive. And she re-releases it. And then she shows how the fragments, she didn't give the whole tradition out, obviously, but what she does show is that it's far more advanced and unifying than what we already have. And she shows that the fragments that exist in each one of these other schools of religious thought are there in the same doctrine that she's professing at the same time. So she does a massive compare and analysis and shows that the mysteries were fragmented and that here are the pieces that you can see in each one of these religions because it was truly broken up and that it had not been brought back together again until she attempted to. And I mean, I don't know that you could totally say that she succeeded because the religions did not unite. And but you also have at the same time, if you go back before Theosophy again, you go back to say 1000 BC to 400 AD. You once again have kind of the height of a second mystery school system. You have the Eleusinian mysteries and the Bacchic mysteries and the mysteries of Odin, mysteries of Orpheus, Adonis, and Attis, the Kabirian mysteries, the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, the mysteries of Ishtar and Tammuz, the mysteries of the Druids. You have the mysteries of Mithra in Mithraism. You have what else? You have well, I mean, then you have the Roman version, and then you have the mysteries of some of the Greek cultures. And Plato and Pythagoras and Iamblichus and Porphyry and Proclus were all initiates into these schools and these systems. Aristotle was not. It seems pretty obvious later on. But this was a new height of the mysteries in our current history of the last 5,000 years. The height of the mystery schools, the true height, again, the golden age, was pre-Christian and in those areas. Now you had certain civilizations like the Babylonians and the Sumerians and the Egyptians who had great initiates and a great mystery school. But when you around 500 BC down to 400 AD, it eventually does become decadent and degenerate, and it does engage in certain lewd behaviors like exactly what I'm thinking, like Bacchanalia and Saturnalia and things like that, that people normally associate with these things. But before that, in the time of Plato, in the time of Solon, 500 BC, this was a golden age of the Eleusinian mysteries and all these other mystery school traditions. And in these schools, they would vet you, they would put you on a period of probation, which would last for several years. They would watch you and study you astrally and physically and morally and socially to vet you before you were allowed in, even as a aspiring candidate. So you weren't even allowed to be a neophyte for even a couple years of moral observation, essentially. And then after that, you had to go through the different ranks of initiation. And there were normally between 3 to 9 certain ranks, depending on the mystery schools. Normally there's, but a lot of people just lump it into, there were the lesser mysteries, and then there were the greater mysteries. And now each one has different degrees, of course. But a lot of people lump it into those two to just kind of make it easy, more simplified, the lesser and the greater mysteries. And there's plenty of people that join the lesser mysteries. There's not as many people that would be able to make it into the greater mysteries. So you would have to be initiated. And initiation could come in many forms, but there were certain amazing scenes of people being initiated. It would be like I remember one I've seen where they're in a cave, and a lot of times the mysteries took place in caves because you're going into the womb of the earth, and you're surrounded by a certain magnetic and electromagnetic aura within things like caves like that. They're sacred for a reason. And it's also very symbolic. You're going back into the womb of the earth as your original self, and you come out reborn as a new being, initiated. So it's a symbolic rebirth, a coming back out of the womb of the earth as a newborn man, and you have to die to live. To live, you must die, they say, which means the death of the lower self and the ego and the resurrection into the higher self and the higher man and the higher mind and the spiritual soul with this new knowledge and perception of the universe and your place in that universe. So this is the mystery school tradition. And there were countless varieties of the mysteries, and they're gone. They were wiped out. They were destroyed by the Christian fanatics in the fourth to eighth centuries AD, and a lot of their information was obliterated for all time. According to Blavatsky and some others, some of this was taken and hidden in the East. No one knows for sure. But every time the mysteries tried to come back, first of all, the information could never be destroyed. It certainly was never in the East, even if it was in the West. I mean, you had a Gnostics. You had the Gnostics. That's another group I forgot to mention. The Gnostics were very esoteric and had wonderful information. They were definitely mystery schools. They were the Gnostic schools, the Valentinian, the Basilidian, the Manichaean, the Mandaean schools, the Sethian schools. And they have, and what's amazing about these traditions, and this includes the Kabbalah, though I don't know of any specific name for any Kabbalistic mystery school sect. It's more like this is esoteric Judaism. But in esoteric Judaism and the Kabbalah and Gnosticism, in Neoplatonism, in Platonism, in Neo-Pythagorean,